Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, we've got more extreme weather in the forecast, so to speak, war games, and warnings of war from one nation to another. But we're going to first start off with the Sierra Nevada mountain range. A 400-mile range of mountains has received massive amounts of snow that has taken a little edge off the drought, but it hasn't gotten them out of the woods. And it's done this without first leaving slippery and impassable roads and fallen trees in its wake. And of course, more warm rain. It's on its way, bringing with it the potential of torrential flooding in the area.
Wow. Well, that flooding has already taken hold in some western states, along with high winds and mudslides in California and Nevada. Now, the governor of Nevada has declared a state of emergency, and 2 people have died as a result of flooding. In Reno, Nevada, over 1,000 homes have been evacuated as days of rain and snow made its way down the Truckee River. Now, people who were left behind spent their time stacking sandbags to try to protect their homes and businesses.
That's right. Throughout the region, heavy rains caused some drivers to become stranded. One 12-year-old girl was rescued from an overturned car, and a cab driver lost his life. Both vehicles ran off the road and became submerged in very frigid waters. Yosemite National Park was placed under mandatory evacuations, and Lake Tahoe residents cleared trees off roadways and filled sandbags to protect against the rising Yuba River.
Well, for the first time in history, the United States has added a bumblebee to the endangered species list. The rusty patch bumblebee has almost disappeared from the U.S. over the last 20 years, and 3 other bees could also soon be added to the list. Brigida Santos, an RT correspondent, said that according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the rusty patch bee population has declined 87% since the late 1990s. At one time, they could be found in about 28 states. Now they can only be found in 13.
And that's a huge decline. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service issued a statement saying, "The species, now balancing precariously on the brink of extinction, has become the first ever bumblebee in the United States and the first bee of any kind in the contiguous 48 states to be declared endangered." Well, since the bees have been placed on the list of endangered species, resources can be allocated to save the dying population. Now, as a note, the bees are very important because, of course, they are pollinator bees, and they are responsible for pollinating 1/3 of the crops.
Well, Wildlife Service has estimated that they contribute $3 billion worth of pollination services in the U.S. alone. Now, scientists speculate overuse of pesticides and climate change are a cause of the decline. Now, the other 3 species of bees considered to be added to the list is the Franklin bumblebee, which may already be extinct, along with the western and the yellow bandit bumblebees. So 3 more that they may consider adding.
It's kind of scary to think about the fact that those insects that are responsible for pollinating the foods that we depend on are actually decreasing in numbers, which means food could possibly decrease
and they
as
do
well.
so much.
That's right. Well, corn and corn byproducts are consumed by hundreds of millions of people on a daily basis. Well, GMO corn has become increasingly more common, and GMO companies say it's equivalent in safety to non-GMO corn. But a new study published in Nature magazine by Dr. Michael Antonou is proving that to be false. Roundup Ready corn, NK603, a Monsanto product that's considered glyphosate resistant or tolerant, tests revealed that it was safe to consume and be served around the country. Again, those tests were performed by Monsanto.
Well, the new study finds that the test was ambiguous and not accurate. Dr. Antonou studied NK603 crops and non-GMO crops for 2 seasons. One batch of crops was treated with glyphosate and the other was not. Now, this was done to study genetic modification instead of the applied herbicide. Researchers found that the GMO corn had large amounts of toxic substances in them, which could escalate allergic reactions in those who have food allergies.
Scary. Experts say that in order to get the long-term effects of what GMO corn is doing to us, more independent studies need to be done. Now, Roundup Ready corn is a type of corn that's engineered by Monsanto to resist massive amounts of Roundup herbicide, which make Roundup the #1 chemical that we are exposed to as consumers, of course. Everything from cotton, corn, alfalfa, sugar beets, all of the top crops have been modified to have this herbicide-resistant trait.
In fact, food isn't the only thing to worry about. Even our drinking water has Roundup in it. In fact, rats fed Roundup Ready foods with 400,000 times less the amount what's allowable by regulators in our food. And Katan, this tiny little amount that the rats are fed is equivalent to what we get in our foods every day. They got this fatty liver disease, which correlates with liver and heart disease and diabetes, basically the chronic diet-related diseases that we have been plagued with, that Americans have been plagued with for many years now.
Yeah, that's been on the rise as well. Well, in fact, those studies were done by Monsanto themselves, and regulators could have stepped in at that time, but nothing was done. This was according to Alexis Bannon-Mayer, a political director for the Organic Consumers Association. One of the reasons that she said studies are hard to come by on these GMO crops is because Monsanto holds the patents, first off, to these crops. And of course, Jeff, Monsanto is the largest funders of our university system here in the United States.
It's hard to think that it's not biased when they're the ones behind all the studies and giving all the money.
Yeah, well, a lot of people are asking questions now.
Yeah. Well, as a note, in case you're wondering, corn is in virtually everything we eat, from multi-ingredient foods to meats. So in order to ensure some level of safety for you and your family, you have to look for non-GMO project verified or organic foods.
Well, the incoming president is also proposing to modify along the U.S. border. Of course, our chief correspondent, Larry McGee, has been following that story as well as several others for us. Larry, what do you have?
Tensions haven't eased between President-elect Donald Trump and President NATO of Mexico concerning a proposal that the Mexican government should fund the construction of a wall along the U.S.-Mexican border. The Mexican head has stated that Mexico will not pay the estimated $25 billion in construction costs and has countered that the U.S. should improve on efforts to prevent illegal gun trafficking into Mexico. Not just guns, but soldiers and hundreds of military vehicles are arriving in Poland for mass NATO war games. The gathering is a part of Operation Atlantic Resolve and is being called the largest in Europe in decades. U.S. Army General Christopher Norrie says they have an incredibly lethal large Army Brigade combat team, and their purpose is to add to an already incredibly strong deterrent capability in Eastern Europe. The exercises also included more than several nations that are also said to be surrounding Russia along its western border, including Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and Estonia. The operation was reportedly announced by the U.S. in response to concerns voiced by the Baltic states regarding Russian aggression, but some European nations see the move as dangerously provocative and are reportedly angered by the maneuvers that are slated to be conducted for 9 months along the Russian border. With the largest deployment since World War II, Cold War mindsets, and nuclear weapons all being a part of the equation, many European citizens are understandably alarmed with the result that protests have ignited across the continent. Rainer Braun of Germany's peace movement says the issue is that the people of Europe would rather have peaceful relations with Russia in a climate of cooperation, trade, exchange of opinion, and common activities. What they don't want, he says, is war, and the circumstances that they believe have come as a result of NATO being aggressively redirected towards Russia over the last 20 years. On the question of Russian aggression itself, Braun says the Crimea issue and the Ukraine issue has responsibility on many sides. It's impossible, he stated, to accuse one side. What is needed, he believes, is cooperation on both sides. And he maintains that NATO's response has nothing to do with the peaceful solution in Europe. His call is for disarmament, reduction of military troops on the Russian-NATO border, a decrease in nuclear weapons, and an abandonment of mass military structures on both sides. He sees the matter potentially escalating into a world war that could ultimately include nuclear weapons. The representative, who was issuing comments after having attended UN meetings in New York, stated with some considerable anxiety that what he found unpleasant is that from what he was able to gather from the hearings, it is pretty much clear that the same politics will continue under the incoming president. Reiner isn't the only one upset with the UN and vain politics. The new UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has been vocal as of late concerning what he perceives as a failure on behalf of the United Nations to prevent wars and conflicts across the globe. The UN had stated that the United Nations was established to prevent war by binding nations in a rules-based international order. Today, he says that order is under grave stress. The cause of crises, he stated, are interlinked, and the UN's response has remained fragmented. All of this was contributed during Mr. Guterres' first address to the UN Security Council since taking office this month. The leader believes the governing body is in need of an overhaul in regards to its approach to preventing wars, and he has pledged to strengthen the UN's ability to mediate conflicts with the ultimate goal of preventing them as opposed to merely responding to them. The urging comes at a time when the Security Council is deadlocked over several major crises in nations such as Syria, Burundi, and South Sudan. The former refugee chief believes the organization has lost too many opportunities to prevent conflicts due to mistrust among states. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, regarding that wall there, Jeff, it's interesting because the Mexican president is saying, no way, we're not paying for a wall. And of course, the incoming president-elect Trump is saying, we're going to have you foot the bill. So I guess we'll see how things take place in the next coming months.
All right. Well, earlier this week, RT asked author and activist David Swanson why the claims of alleged Russian hacking got so much attention in the mainstream media despite the lack of concrete proof or any evidence at all. Mr. Swanson responded, I think the desire for an explanation for how Trump became president that doesn't blame the Democratic Party or the establishment as a whole. I think the fear and demonization of a foreign target, in this case, Vladimir Putin, as xenophobia. And of course, xenophobia, Katan, is that fear or hatred for strangers or foreigners or anything that's strange or foreign. So they're trying to demonize, their words, Russia and people. Vladimir Putin.
Interesting. Well, Swanson also commented on the recent U.S. moves, including the troop buildup near Russia and the potential for war. He said, clearly combined with the shipment of troops and tanks to Poland and other countries on the border of Russia and the missile base in Romania and under construction in Poland. I think it's all a part of a package aimed almost openly at profits for weapons profiteers. Well, this is what it's about. Some of these people are willing, he said, to risk nuclear war.
Wow, now that's a scary thought.
It really is, very scary.
Well, Russia is not the only country that the United States has managed to irritate lately. China has also expressed its frustrations with recent comments made by Secretary of State nominee Rex Tillerson over the Chinese man-made islands in the South China Sea. Now, at his confirmation hearing, Tillerson said, we're going to have to send China a clear signal that first, the island building stops, And second, your access to those islands is also not going to be allowed.
Ooh, sounds almost like fighting words right there. Well, the Chinese has fired back as a government-run Chinese newspaper and now warning of a possible war with the U.S. over the man-made islands. The Chinese newspaper Global Times said, quote, unless Washington plans to wage a large-scale war in the South China Sea, then trying to block China's access to the islands would be, quote, foolish. This is what the Chinese are saying. The article continued saying Tillerson had better bone up on nuclear power strategies if he wants to force a big nuclear power, referring to China itself, to withdraw from its own territories.
Well, how could the U.S. deny China access to those islands? Gregory Poling with the Center of Strategic and International Studies explained to CNN that the U.S. would have to start with a naval blockade. But that wouldn't be all, as China has air capabilities as well. And with 4 different airstrips and enough hangar space for a full line of fighter aircraft, they would have to consider China's Air Force. And this is out there on those man-made islands. They're pretty built up right now.
Yeah, we reported on that not too long ago. However, that's not all. Satellite imagery shows these islands are equipped with advanced air defense and anti-missile systems, as well as anti-aircraft guns. Since these statements from China were made, Pentagon officials have been calling on China to reduce tensions. Analysts are also worried about escalation, with the biggest fear being an accidental conflict.
Well, with all the world powers being under such tense relations these days, there are many people in Europe worried and even fearful that we are facing World War III. But what is the cause for all the tension? Well, one former U.S. State Department official, Matthew Howe, told RT in an interview the answer is American politics.
Mr. Howe resigned from his post as the State Department at the State Department, in protest over U.S. strategic policy and goals in Afghanistan in September of 2009. He is currently a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy and promotes Veterans for Peace, an international group whose mission is to build a culture of peace through awareness and education. The group informs the public of the true cause of war and the enormous cost of wars.
Well, when asked why World War III seems to be looming on the horizon, Howe quickly stated the desire for politicians in the United States to have this enemy, Russia, again. And this comes from a variety of factors. This comes from our excessive military budget. We spend more, he said, on the United States military than the next 10 countries in the world combined. We have troops in about 130 countries around the world, and we have 800 bases overseas.
Oh, that's amazing. Howe pointed out that making this enemy out of Russia is just another way of breeding fear in society and making them feel there is a need for a strong military presence overseas. But as RT News anchor Kevin Owen pointed out, you can only poke the dog so often, and it's going to snap back at some point.
And that's what everybody's worried about, there's some type of accident taking place or somebody saying the wrong thing, and before you know it, all-out war.
That's right.
Well, Howe explained the focus of the United States government isn't on the ultimate end result of an all-out war. He said it's about keeping the status quo going. Keep the empire alight, he said. You've got to justify these $600 to $700 billion a year defense budgets in the United States. You got to have the Democrats looking as tough as Republicans on foreign policy.
And he continued, you've got to distract the American people from all the problems we have here at home in the United States. And so, time and again, go through the history of the world. The best way for a government to keep its people focused on something rather than its own problems is to create an enemy abroad.
Well, no doubt Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't have very far to go to find his enemies. The Israeli Prime Minister recently condemned the peace conference to be held on January 15th in Paris. Netanyahu told the press there are other such efforts that render peace hopeless, and one of them is the Paris conference. It's a rigged conference, he said, rigged by the Palestinians with French auspices to adopt international anti-Israel stances.
Interesting. According to Reuters, the objective of the conference is to reaffirm the international community's collective commitment to a two-state settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Netanyahu was adamant the conference would only make things worse, saying, "This pushes peace backwards. It's not going to obligate us. It's a relic of the past. It's last gasp of the past before the future sets in." And of course, future he's also talking about is reference to the President-elect of the United States, Donald Trump.
Right. Well, our final report takes us to the confirmation hearing for James Mattis. Now, last week he testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee to become the new Defense Secretary under President-elect Donald Trump. In this clip from the hearing, the chairman, Senator John McCain, questioned Mattis to see what his position was concerning the current relationships with President Putin, Russia as a whole, and the Chinese government. Let's take a listen.
I've watched three presidents commit themselves to a new relationship with Vladimir Putin. All three have been an abysmal failure. Should we ignore the lessons of history in our relationship with Vladimir Putin, and what should we be doing?
Chairman, history is not a straitjacket, but I've never found a better guide for the way ahead than studying the history. Since Yalta, we have a long list of times that we've tried to engage positively with Russia. We have a relatively short list of successes in that regard. And I think right now the most important thing is that we recognize the reality of what we deal with Mr. Putin, and we recognize that he is trying to break the North Atlantic Alliance, and we recognize that he is trying to break the North Atlantic Alliance, and we recognize that he is trying to break the North Atlantic Alliance, and that we take the steps, the integrated steps, diplomatic, economic, military, and the alliance steps, the working with our allies to defend ourselves where we must.
As we are all aware that following World War II, a world order was established. A world order was established. A world order was established, which has held for basically the last 70 years. Held for basically the last 70 years. A world order was established. Held for basically the last 70 years. Do you believe that that world order is now under more strain than it's ever been?
I think it's under the biggest attack since World War II, sir, and that's from Russia, from terrorist groups, and with what China is doing in the South China Sea.
Well, I guess they want somebody in there that's definitely going to be along their line of thinking.
That's right.
Well, certain leaders of this world have been pushing this new world order for quite some time. What they fail to see is that in nuclear war, there are no winners. Now, the nations are angry and on the brink of war. One wrong move or one slip-up could erupt into an all-out nuclear war. And as war plans are being drawn up and heated words exchanged, Yisrael Hawkins and a dedicated group of workers are publishing plans for peace and words of kindness that have the ability to change the hearts and minds. Well, plan for your future by getting involved today. Contact the House of Yahweh, and when you do, don't forget to request your free Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how.
You can contact the House of Yahweh by writing them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604, or call them at 1-800-613-9494, or visit them on any of their websites at www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit us on our website at www.ypnnews.com. You can also email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And don't forget about the best study resource to the Holy Scriptures, the Yisrael Says program, which can be found at www.yisraelsays.com.
Well, get ready to stand and cheer. Up next is Yisrael Hawkins. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.